In project-based learning, students master content and 21st century skills by collaborating to create a product or plan a performance, ideally for a public audience.
The focus is on mirroring as much as possible the way we do things in the real world. The focus is on doing something and learning what we need to do to get to the space where we're ready to do that thing. The motto that the Bucks Institute of Education, or BIE, the folks who made the video you watched at the beginning of this lesson, used to describe project-based learning is that it's the main course, not dessert. In many traditional classrooms, the project plays the role of being the activity we do at the end of the lesson that's sort of a fluffy activity, something we do for fun after learning the real material in the meat of the unit. For example, if your students study westward expansion and you follow up by having them build a covered wagon using popsicle sticks and old rags, while it may be fun and they may learn something about crafts, they're probably not learning a great deal about westward expansion. That's a dessert sort of project. On the other hand, if they learn about westward expansion through a project in which they work together to prepare to load a wagon and to chart a path through the countryside, that's closer to the ideal of project-based learning. The process for designing project-based learning, or PBL, is similar to that of inquiry-based learning, or IBL. Except instead of starting with what you want the students to learn, you start with what you want them to do. But it should still be a product that is aligned with standards. So looking at the standards addressed in your curriculum, consider, why are these students learning this? It should be because there is some real-world task that they should be prepared for. The real-world task is good guidance for what the product of your PBL activity should be.
For example, why do students learn the scientific method? They learn the scientific method to solve real problems using scientific inquiry.
In project-based learning, students wouldn't follow instructions on a handout to reproduce an experiment. Instead, they would design an experiment about a pressing issue from scratch. From there, you're going to design and implement an entry event. Talk about that more in a moment. And then just like with IBL, you're going to provide resources, you're going to guide them through that. And then, another big part of PBL is that public audience we discussed before. And so you're going to facilitate the presentation or publication of the project if you're including a public element. Then you're going to assess. So let's imagine that we are designing a unit. You want to teach your students about the scientific process, and you want them to create some sort of public product sharing their findings. You will likely need to give your students some sort of place to start from, something to pique their interest. This is what BIE calls the entry event. The entry event is where you sort of give students their mission, and it can be something real, or it can be something imaginary, sort of a fun role-playing scenario that gets them started. Now, in a blended learning environment, real entry events can be much more practical than they are in a strictly brick-and-mortar environment. Using web conferencing, you could easily bring in experts from anywhere in the world. This is especially valuable in isolated communities where students don't get a lot of opportunities to see role models in certain professions. Now, you can take the easy road and sort of tell them about either this real or this imagined scenario that they need to deal with. Or you might get a little fancier and have a letter written by an outside party to your students. Now, again, they may or may not be a real sender, but something sort of bringing the outside environment into the classroom. Or, if you really want to be dramatic, you can either dress up or have a trusted adult come in costume in order to give them sort of this entry event. Regardless, give them something to ask about to get them starting to ask questions. So in this example scientific process unit, you might have 2 opinion letters from community members. One saying that a local creek is too dirty for children to play in, and the other saying it's just fine, we've been playing in it for years, there's no problem. Now, if this is a real creek that students like to swim in, they may already have opinions about this. Or regardless, they may have some sort of initial impression they want to discuss. So foster that. Give them the opportunity to discuss. Let them express their opinions either in a face-to-face conversation or perhaps in a discussion board. From there, you might tell students what sort of product it is that they're going to make to answer the question, or you might have them design the product, depending on their maturity, their ability, and their familiarity with project-based learning. One caveat to be careful of is, obviously, if certain kinds of products are part of the standards in your class, for example, if you're the English teacher, you may need them to do a particular type of product, like a research paper. But if possible, it can be great to let the students design the product. These are some of the elements of a good product in a project-based learning lesson. The product requires the use of 21st century tools and processes. The product is an authentic product. It's something that people would actually make to answer this question. So as opposed to a diorama, as much as I loved making dioramas in school, you would make something that people would actually make in the real world to express their thoughts and feelings on this or their learning. The product should be something that requires deep inquiry and reflection, something that requires real thought and not just a listing of facts, and it should be something that has a public audience.